The meeting of the Moines Waterworks Board of Trustees. I think we all know we have a meeting immediately following this with some of our regional customers and their leadership. So they may be coming in between items, but we're going to move quickly. We will be making a change in the room, so any volunteers who want to stick around and help with that, you get extra credit. So I'd like to ask for a motion for the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Public comment period is time that anyone here can speak on an agenda item or any other item before us. And I see Jeannie back there, so anything, Jeannie?
I could talk, but.
Okay.
Oh, boy, no.
Okay, moving ahead. Our first item is the 2019 budget.
And if I may, this is an item that I think all of the board have some familiarity with through our earlier discussions, particularly in finance and audit. The long and short of it is about a $68 million budget for 2019. Roughly $46 million is operation and maintenance, 22 is capital improvement. You'll have a presentation on the 5-year CIP the first quarter of next year, where we tie the 2019 number into the consecutive 5-year period to give you some sense of our view of where that should go. Happy to answer any questions that you may have on this. Again, we're relatively conservative about the way we've approached the budget. The 22 million CIP out of a total of 68 million is, I think, in the minds of certainly the operating representatives in front of me and most of our field employees, probably an underinvestment in many views, but we think it is appropriate as we kind of get our sea legs here moving forward as to what's going to happen in the near and long term relative to our overall business plan. Again, happy to answer any questions you may have. And Ms. Peggy is here also with a profound knowledge of line items in the budget. So absent that, I sure appreciate you moving the 2019 budget forward.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, let's back up a moment, folks. We need to do a public hearing first, I believe. But we'll come back to you on that motion. Thank you to the Finance and Audit Committee, Graham, and to everyone for participating in all the discussions leading up to this. So I'll open the public hearing to see if there are any comments from the public to discuss the 2019 budget. We will close that public hearing, and now I'm looking for a motion to approve the 2019 budget.
So.
And second?
Second.
Okay, any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And opposed. Moving ahead, Bill, the 2019 water treatment chemicals.
And an integral part, obviously, of the action we've just taken, particularly relative to operational maintenance budget or chemicals necessary to support our operations. You know, each year prior to the approval of the budget, Peggy and her staff and Kyle and the production staff in particular go through a process of soliciting line item chemicals. You have a pretty good summary of it in the yellow sheet in front of you. If you've had a chance to look at the tab, I think you'll notice that a couple things. Each and every line item has gone up, with one or two exceptions that are essentially flat. That is, they're the same cost per chemical in 2019 as they were in 2018. But overall, you see about a 10% increase here in costs associated with last year, or this year, 2018's use. About half of that, however, is increased use quantities of some chemicals that we're anticipating in 2019, particularly activated carbon. We continue to rely on the miracles of the chemistry of activated carbon to move forward our need to clean source waters for ultimate consumption by our customers. Happy to answer any questions you may have on this. Again, it's a pretty good book of business, about $5.2 million anticipated for 2019, given the price increases and increase in some quantities here. Happy to walk through any particular questions you may have. I'm sure you'll note that the usual high dollar items here involve lime and activated carbon as an example, but a pretty good breakdown by plant also in the chemical price change summary report you have. Again, happy to answer any questions you may have.
So I'm looking for a motion to award the 2019 contract for water treatment chemical supplies to the low responsible bidders, as indicated on your sheets there. Unless someone would like to do the name of all of the chemicals, because I'm not going to.
So moved.
Second,
Second.
any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Moving ahead, it's the 2018 Des Moines Water Main Replacement Contract number 1.
We're asking for your acceptance of the contract now finalized out with Holbrook. You may recall, or your yellow sheet will help to remind you, the original contract was for a little shy of $1.3 million because of some change orders necessary here, dealing with change of site conditions, which we can sure talk about, or changes in quantity. We're adding an additional roughly $200,000 here to the amount for a total requested payment to Holbrook of about 1.49 million, we'll say, rounding up. Happy to answer any questions. A good map of where these projects were in the materials. Most of you will be familiar with the work that happened out here on Fleur Drive around Grays Lake and the park immediately beside us. Thomas Beck, for those of you who take that route, in East Watrous. Some are very familiar with a smaller area up off East 4th and Maple Street on the other side of the river. Happy to answer any questions you may have here. Again, not far off the original contract price, only changes in quantities, meaning that there's actually some areas where we underestimated the either amount of pipe or other building materials necessary to complete the project, and a few change orders involving essentially soil or underground conditions that is probably our responsibility as owner to anticipate better than the contractor when they ran into adverse conditions. There's a change order necessary to support finishing the work. Again, happy to answer any questions you might have on it.
Looking for a motion to accept the 2018 Des Moines Water Main Replacement Contract 1, completed by Holbrook Construction, Inc., in the amount of $1,484,279.70.
So moved. Second.
Okay, any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Moving ahead to item 3D.
An item that I'm sure many of you are rather surprised to see, in the sense that this is moving towards actual expansion at the Saylorville Water Treatment Plant. This is adding a 4th RO unit in our treatment train there, which essentially allows us, or will allow us, to add between 1.5 and 2 million gallons of additional production on a daily basis. What we're requesting here is your authorization to solicit bids for a public hearing on the results of that bidding process in January. Between Kyle and I and a number of other people in front of us, happy to answer any questions either now or at the public hearing in January.
So we're looking for a motion to authorize staff to solicit bids for the Saylorville Water Treatment Plant, RO, Unit Number 4 installation and establish the date of the public hearing as the date of the January 2019 board meeting and direct staff to publish notice as provided by law.
So moved.
A second?
Second.
And if I may, before you vote on it, it might be helpful to make clear, which I did not make clear in my remarks, we've spent $500,000 roughly on the unit itself. This is for the installation of the unit. So essentially half the project has already been acquired through purchase. Now the complexity of adding it to our facility, the electrical, the plumbing work is what remains at about $500,000. Sorry to add that at the end rather than at the beginning.
Well, you have the details in here, so that's great. Any additional questions? All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed? And we are at item 3E.
3E is a great additional piece of the water main replacement, capital improvement. You have approved in the budget about $8 million total doing that system-wide. About $1 million will go to this, should you approve it. You know that we coordinate our projects often with city projects. The city has slated a number of projects, largely on the southeast side. The map in your materials talks about South Union, South Kirkwood, or East Kirkwood, and Southeast Fifth. Again, primarily on the southeast side. These are road and sewer projects where relocating our sewers and reconnecting services is a pretty important part of it. This is requesting authorization to reimburse the city based on cost data that is part of their bidding process at about $970,000 for projects that will happen in calendar year 2019.
We're looking for a motion to authorize state staff to reimburse the city of Des Moines for the water main relocations for the 2019 roadway reconstruction program.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, any other discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Next, I don't think we are meeting, oh, do we need a motion on this for the meetings? So you'll see in the packet the dates of the meetings that are proposed for the board meetings as well as the committee meetings. I will say, Bill mentioned to us that the December meeting, if we stuck with the fourth Tuesday, that would be on Christmas Eve. So you're proposing on the agenda that would be December 17th, the week before instead. And you can see the other dates, and I'll say we are flexible as we need to. If there are travel schedules or other things that we need to make changes to the committee meetings, we generally do that at the meeting prior to the upcoming month. So I'm looking for a motion to approve the proposed 2019 schedule for the Des Moines Water Works Board of Trustee and committee meetings.
So.
Second.
Any discussion? Okay. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And opposed? We have some committee reports, I believe, or informational items, unless we've already covered them. Planning committee?
We had a terrific presentation on the park. It wasn't what we're doing here, it's the history of the park. And I think really, not to get into it, we should have that presentation at a board meeting sometime.
David, happy to do that. You'll recall that we committed that we were going to do a similar kind of historic dig into the Maffett area, also perhaps combining them together in an after-board meeting, since it's really not connected with any immediate business, might be helpful.
Sometime,
Take a look at
and
that.
maybe we can even have it televised. Some way to get it on the website. And then possibly have a presentation for the park board, and maybe they could arrange something for certain donors.
I'm sure Ted and his staff are excited at the opportunity of doing all that, so happy to do a date, but we'll shoot for something in the spring that would combine a look at not only here the Des Moines Waterworks Park, but map it. The history is pretty interesting.
It was really
particularly
eye-opening.
the tree side of the world, very interesting.
Okay, Graham, do you want to take the next two, finance and audit and
I don't
customer
know if there's anything to
relations?
report on finance to audit.
You've really taken
We've
action on
done
that through.
And really, our meeting following this is customer relations, so I don't know if there's anything on that. Now, I will say from the Botanical Garden, I think I mentioned earlier that I was chairing their strategic planning committee, and that's ongoing. One thing that I find interesting that the Botanical Garden is doing is they have a contract, and actually revenue generating contract with Des Moines Performing Arts to take care of Coles Plaza. And it is something that they being the Botanical Garden, sees as a revenue generator for them. As an entity that takes care of, I don't know, medians on Floor Drive, I find it interesting. That those types of cooperative efforts make sense. It makes sense for the performing arts because they don't have to do it. They're gonna get some garden expertise along, and as well as some maintenance expertise. But it's an interesting thing to note.
And they are doing an amazing job. I was there over the weekend, without a town guest. Oh,
It's a great place.
it's amazing. And the staff is terrific. Unique little gift items for anyone that needs holiday gifts.
As I mentioned, the gift shop is always a struggle because it's hard to buy for a small store like that, and sometimes they do well and sometimes they don't. The only area they missed their budget target last year was the gift shop. They still made money, but they missed their target. So just interesting.
They have terrific puppets.
Oh,
Amazing
puppets.
paper puppets.
So anyway, but as I pass along the Coles comments, I think it's interesting.
Okay, moving ahead then, so we've hit 3 of them. And then Park Foundation Board, any additional information, Mark or Dave?
One of the things, we had the memorial, we had a judging on some submissions from artists about the memorial that we would have, and we selected an artist that was based out of Massachusetts currently, but is originally from Creston, Iowa. And proposals are, as we've always talked, they're working items. Somebody puts out an idea of kind of general way that they're going, and they try to meet the sometimes strict criteria, but what we have said, and there's some give and take, but so we selected that. Things seem to be going forward. We're hopeful that we'll have bids going out on the passageway in January, and I think the weather has gotten drier, so we've had some more progress. The restroom construction has started, and I think it's kind of nice to actually see a building going up. People are pretty excited about these things. The bigger news was that we've got some public monies that have come in, so we're at about $775,000 in public monies that have come in, and are starting to head towards other things, and feel good about that. Especially in Polk County, we had some delay concerns on our contracting and whether we were getting union contractors. We had to work that out because we didn't have any union bidders, which makes it difficult. We got that figured out. So.
Wait till everybody sees the steel when it gets starting.
And if I may, Dave, run with that for a second. The materials, the written materials that you have, or the online materials, have some great photos of what will happen, the metalwork behind us, the canopy, and then I think the term is basket pillars that are being fabricated in Sheraton by a group I had not heard of before, Johnston Steelworks, but really pretty impressive metalwork, and I believe that those should be set sometime in December, so that'll be an interesting process to watch. I know Michael certainly is going to be far more familiar with the schedule than I am, but the materials that you have, you might want to take a look at those before they start to pop up on the other side of the levee. It'll be an impressive thing to take a look at, that's for sure.
Thank you. Laura Sarcone, been hearing good things about your government outreach, if you'd like to give us an update on that.
Sure. In the memo that was provided to you, staff and our contract lobbyists and contract public affairs met and decided on our legislative priorities for the 2019 state legislative session. And two are very familiar. They are carryovers from previous years, including number one, which is local control of drinking water. We'll continue to advocate that and let the experts continue the process which we're going through. Number two is empowering drainage districts for water quality efforts. We will continue to vocalize the concern and opportunity for drainage districts to be proactive in their water quality efforts. And then number three is a new priority for 2019, and that is a comprehensive review and update to the 30-year-old state water plan. And that state water plan was published in 1985, so that is past due, we believe, and a comprehensive water resource management plan is needed for the state. As a reminder, January 14th is the first date of the session, and then I will be sending calendar invitations for Thursday, February 28th, which is a legislative breakfast for our Des Moines Waterworks service area legislators.
Thank you.
And just to, as a point of emphasis on the legislative priorities, the state water plan, this is the, among other things, it's the priority of river use as an example between human consumption, between manufacturing, between power production, between agriculture. So 1985, I'm pretty confident, much like some members of this administration in DC, there was no understanding or appreciation of climate change. Many of us have a far different view of climate change now, and so having that needed into some view of how the state approaches prioritization among a short resource among very different uses and very different priorities is going to be very important. Our discussions with the DNR have led us to some concern that they feel under-resourced or not terribly interested in engaging in this discussion. But from a drinking water perspective, from a trustees perspective, from a board perspective, I'm confident that you would feel better if we had more than an every 30-year look at the priorities necessary to be able to draw water without competing directly with other users from our river sources.
Thank you. Next on our agenda item, just as a reminder, we had asked permission of the board for Mark and I as chair and vice chair to be your nominating committee. And Mark, I'm going to put you on the spot, if that's all right, so that you can report out what we are doing.
Well, I'm going to choose my words carefully. When I know we've had strange transitions here in the last couple of years as far as the way we've moved from person to person. I think that Diane has agreed to be the chair this next year, is my understanding, and welcome that. We appreciate that willingness to serve because of other folks, having served in different capacities, and I know Sue and Graham have both alternated on some things. There's been a lot. So my understanding is that Diane would like to have some time to talk to everybody on the board about who should be vice chair. I will say at this time that I'm going to be resigning as of the end of January. I've tried to communicate with the mayor about transition, about supporting the waterworks, the board, everybody who works here, by having good leadership and having people on the board. We had a big gap last year for a long time. I haven't had my calls returned, I haven't had my texts returned. And, I came on here almost 6 years ago. It's been a lot of fights. You have to come in here prepared to do a lot of work on some things that are not always easy and not always fun. And I do it for all the 500,000 people that need our water and 200 plus employees that need to have good policies to make sure that, when you're out there in the middle of the dirt and the January mud, that you've got a reason to be out there and that you're getting support and all the materials you need. So at the end of January, I think that'll be the last time. I've got a couple of other things I want to do, and I'll give Diane time to talk to our other board members and make sure that the city council can figure out what they want to do in making a new appointment.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you for your service.
If I may, first, Mark, thank you for the interesting perspective you brought. Much appreciate that. Diane, what I would suggest is from a staff perspective, we would want to be able to publish both positions to the public before the meeting on December 18th, as I recall. So by the 10th or so, it would be helpful for us to know chair and vice chair. But also, I would ask that you give consideration to how you want to handle the committees. It should also either be reappointed or redesignated at the same meeting, the December meeting, because they then become effective during the committee meetings beginning January 1. So having that approval process, I think, is going to be necessary too.
And I'll just say, we all know what happens when we have a four-member board. We struggled through that for several months, so Diane will give you our full support to serve on committees or in whatever capacity as you assume the chair position. And I hope you do have someone filling Mark's role very quickly. Any other comments? With that, Counselor, do we need a motion to approve Diane Denny as our chair?
No, I think
No, it's just.
it's just an informal indication of the board's sentiment, and I think the contemplation is to do an official board agenda item for the next meeting.
Thank you. And Bill, do you want to wrap it up for us with CEO and general manager comments?
I'll wrap it up in the best way possible by saying I have nothing to add.
Okay, with that, I'm looking for a motion to adjourn.
So
Second.
Okay, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Mayor Peter,
Yes, ma'am.
you called this meeting?
I did, and I have to leave early, so I apologize. It'll be, get everything stirred up, and then I'm gonna leave, and then I'll see how things turned out. Yeah, no, I appreciate it, yeah, I'm gonna have to leave about 20 to 5, I apologize about that, but my regular employer is requesting my attendance somewhere else, so. Well, I thought it'd be good for kind of all of us after what we've been through the last year to get together and kind of find out where do we think we all are, and maybe what are some of the critical decisions to be made. I think everybody's interested in keeping this moving forward. I think there's might be some timing issues too, so, I don't know, Stu, if you want to share with us the resolution you guys passed, and then I'm happy to kind of share with you, at least from my vantage point, what I think the two most important things are. I mean, ultimately, it's going to be Urbandale, West Des Moines, and you guys making the decisions as the water utilities, but the resolution that you guys passed, can you give us a little background on that?
We had an executive committee meeting of the 4 mayors of the 3 water utility representatives, and at that meeting, really the question was put to me from Des Moines Water Works saying, where is your board? And we would really like to meet with your board, and we want to know if you're ready to move ahead. So within 24 hours, I think you all noticed that we did pass the resolution as a board. We had a meeting coming up that next day. And so I've shared that with all of you electronically. I hope you have had a chance to review it. Since then, we've had many other discussions. I think our full board, I'll let everyone here speak for themselves, we are extremely interested in moving ahead on regionalization. As we know, we started with the MOU process. We came to paragraph number 6, which was about the financials, and we said, let's get some additional support. Let's see if regional governance for a water utility makes sense. Obviously, from the FCS study, we know that that is the case. So now we are standing here waiting to hear from others who's with us. We want to form a regional water utility. I don't think we know exactly what that means day one versus 10 years out, but certainly the intent on behalf of our board, I think, is there to move ahead, and it's time we know who's in the boat with us. So that's what we would like to have, and it doesn't have to be as formal as the resolution that we provided to all of you, expressing our strong interest. So with that in mind, does that give you the backdrop?
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, and I guess I'm happy to turn it over to other folks. I think this full year's been great. I think we've gotten to know each other better. I think we've had really good conversations. Jason and his team have done a lot of digging into information. And, if we're sticking with the premise that, if we all regionally collaborate on production of water, then we don't want people going off on their own, producing their own water, because it takes away from the critical mass that we all need. So the idea being, if we're all part of it, then we need to give up a right to build our own facilities. It seems to me that the two most critical issues to keep this moving forward would be the ownership rights in the regional production facilities. I'm still not sure if we're clear on whether this board is willing to allow ownership by other people of the existing Des Moines treatment plants. And then the second issue really becomes, one of timing. We talked last year that we have 3 to 5 years of excess capacity available to us. Now we're down to 2 to 4. So part of the concern is, West Des Moines, Waukee, and Urbandale are going to move forward with building their own plants. I mean, it's going to take a while to build them, and I think none of us want to get to a point where we're still having this conversation 2 years from now, and all of a sudden we're confronted with the situation of, well, we need additional capital from everybody to add more capacity. Because if we're going to build our own plant, why would we add more capital to somebody else's plant? So I think some of it is this, my concern is the timing issue now from the standpoint of excess and available capacity, but it seems to me that we need to understand the ownership issue, and the other one that came clear with Jason's work is the financial issues of this. It was apparent to me that there needs to be some agreement or concession on what the rates are going to be, because what the rates being suggested, at least as I viewed it from West Des Moines Waukee's standpoint, was we're going to pay significantly higher rates to be regionalized than what we could do it on our own. So Jason was suggesting we need to socialize some of the benefits and burdens that everybody has to keep the regional thing together. So I think the two critical decisions that we need made primarily by the Des Moines Water Works Board is, are we willing to make changes to the rate structure, and are we willing to allow the other entities that participate to have an ownership interest in the production facilities? I think we all understand, to the extent the other cities have production facilities, those need to be regionalized as well.
Okay. Let's be careful on the term rates, because when you've said rates before, I interpreted that as what are we going to be paying for water next year, the following year, etc. And what I think I hear you say now is its overall costs of running that utility or that water production. Because we cannot tell you today, we just today approved at our board meeting all of the chemicals that it takes. And until we go out for bid on that, we didn't know what the cost would be to produce water. So we can't give you the rate today of what it's going to be 3 years from now. So
Yeah,
that I think has been a little bit of a...
And I'm thinking back to the chart that Jason ended up with. Is,
Sure.
Okay, here's what everybody would have to pay unless you guys are willing to, socialize this somehow. And maybe it's not the right terminology, but it was apparent to us that the rates from the regional one were going to be significantly higher than what at least West Des Moines Water Works and Waukee felt that they could produce it on their own, and I think maybe the same thing from Urbandale. So even Jason made mention of that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, here are the benefits and the burdens, and if you want to regionalize this, it makes sense to share it that way. So I think that financial issue and the ownership issue are critical, because I don't know how we move forward with regionalization if those two pieces don't work. Because you can't give up your right to build your own facilities, really, if you don't have an ownership interest in the ones that you're going to be using. Why would I give up the right to own my own car if I don't have an ownership interest in the one we're sharing? Especially if I've agreed that I'm not going to go do it myself. And I don't, I still feel that all of us being together is the right thing to do for the region in the long term. But until we can get those two issues solved, I don't know how we can make decisions. Other than, my suggestion to Jody was to start the plant for West Des Moines and Waukee, because that can still be a regional facility. We talked about that water source, we talked about Urbandale's. But in light of the 2 to 4 year issue, To me, they need to start building that, and if we regionalize it, it should be part of the regional production assets as well.
Yeah, but to me, I think that just goes so counter to what we're trying to do, to make those decisions as a region and not to have just West Des Moines. So for instance, if you're going to be taking water out of the Raccoon, which you would be doing with the new plant, and then putting pollutants back into the water just before our intake, that increases our cost. And so that doesn't seem, in my mind, and correct me if I'm wrong, any of the engineers that are here, to be the way that we would start off this regional discussion.
But the challenge too is the timing. I mean,
Oh,
we
we
can't sit
know.
here and still have this conversation a year or two from now, and we haven't started the other plant. So part of the challenge we have is we need to assure our users that in 2 to 4 years, they're gonna have all the water they need. And if we're not part of the regional one, we can't be in a position where we can't produce our own. So part of the challenge we have is the timing issue of the whole thing.
I would add to that by saying, part of your question was you said that your board is wanting to pursue this regional effort. It says it in the first sentence here of your resolution. I think all of us are in that same position, or we wouldn't be here tonight. But to what Steve, I think, is talking about, if we go back to the report from Jason, and it showed if you drew a line down, I think there's one that drew a line down the center, and you had a benefit group on this side and cost or whatever he labeled it on the other side. But the idea was to bring those two either to the line or closer to the line. And you talk about that a little bit about the middle of your resolution, and you talk about a more equitable sharing of costs and spreading of assumption of risk. And to me, those really say the same thing, because I'm assuming the risk is the cost of something unexpected or the cost of expansion or whatever. But I think we're all in that same mindset. But I think that the next decision, or at least maybe not decision, but the next, lack of a better word, I guess, is indication of where we want to meet based on those numbers. And not to say that those numbers that were in here, everybody's still not in agreement on the actual numbers. But I think that's something that can be worked through over time to get to where everybody agrees with everybody else's numbers. I think the big elephant in the room here that we need to get a handle on is where is everybody gonna meet on the cost benefit or the cost benefit, I guess would be a good way to say it, and enable us to move forward to answer a lot of the things that Steve brought up. And that, I'd like to walk away today with a pretty strong indication of where everybody's at on that particular topic.
Okay. And you've all heard from me, so I'm gonna let some of the other board members share, because that's why we're here, is so you can hear from the other board members.
It seems to me that, or I guess, when I look at this, and have for some time, and I think all of you have heard the broken record that I play, but overcoming this transfer of assets is such a big hurdle. I mean, so many man hours have been spent, and actual dollars have been spent over the last 18 months trying to figure that out. And so I think we should continue to pursue that endeavor, but what I hear and what I am sympathetic to when I hear mayors speak about this issue is you need some reassurance and some actual control of some things. I mean, you want to be able to play a role when it comes to rate setting, into planning for the future, into knowing that those rates that are collected are spent wisely, so that no one entity, the city of Des Moines, is benefiting from the city of Ankeny's rate dollars. That's all understandable to me. And from a big picture, what you really want to be able to do is go what your citizens are paying you to do, and that is to focus on economic development in the future of your cities, so that you know that if you attract or you go out and try to attract a big employer, you know that you can check off the water list, that that's going to be available to you, or at least you have entities in play that are trustworthy to you, that you know you can provide that. And so, I guess, Michelle, do you have that PowerPoint that I did? What I have is just a very rough proposal of an interim step, if you will, something that we could take that I would hope, Mayor, would give you that assurance you're looking for today, but does not throw anything out the window, that we can continue to think about and plan and exhaust every opportunity, whether it's asset transfer or some other model that we, what was the thing that Jason, some sort of lease model that he talked about, some sort of deal like that. But as this pulls up, it's very simple, and maybe I don't really need it, but the idea would be that we could come together in the first part of 2019 and form a water authority through a 28E or F, or whatever they're called, some sort of intergovernmental agreement. And those cities that also are water utilities, that provide, are retail providers of water, that sign on to this agreement, would appoint members to this water authority. That water authority would then approve, as Des Moines Water Works would have to come to this authority as a regional provider of water, present the authority with everything from rates to capital improvement expenditures to planning ideas for the future. And so all of those things would have to come to this entity. Create something else there too, but so how do I get this to advance? Put the middle button? Huh? See, I didn't press it. There we go. So anyway, just to recap a little bit, I kind of see these are, in the roughest of details, things that you want and we can provide today by forming this authority. And which one is it? Well, it's this one. All right, and then, so we form an agreement, give active participation in the governance of a regional water production. This agreement would create a regional water authority, as I mentioned earlier, all members, and the idea would be, again, these are cities that act as a retail provider of water. So all of those cities, these aren't the folks that we provide full service, that are our full service customers. It's Ankeny, it's Clive, it's those folks. The authority would approve all matters of wholesale water production, including approving expenses and revenues. So, to be clear, Des Moines Water Works would gain approval from the authority for regional water rates, expenditures, and related budgetary matters. Des Moines Water Works would be required to inform and include the authority in setting the vision for water production, planning for growth, maintaining regional water production assets. Des Moines Water Works would need to gain the approval of the authority on all matters for regional water production. If I haven't been clear, I'm talking about water rates and how we spend money when it comes to the regional production of water. The sticky part I'd turn over to attorneys to have to really figure out is there'd have to be a mechanism for some sort of impasse. So we bring a rate to the water authority, and the water authority denies it. They say, we're not going to approve this rate structure. Des Moines Water Works would have to come back to the water authority again with a revised plan. If we then still reach an impasse, we'd have to have some way to figure out, to go to arbitration or something in fairly short order, so that A, you would know what your rates were, and B, so that the staff at Des Moines Water Works could plan for the future. I make that arbitration sound very simple, and maybe it won't be, but and then what I really want to be clear about, what this agreement and forming this authority that would start functioning in 2019, it does not end the exploration of asset transfer or any other model, because quite frankly, we need to figure those things out. Especially when we're talking about future growth. If we're going to build a new plant, and how are we going to pay for that plant and who's going to own it, it might make perfect sense for this authority, if you put out all the existing stuff to the side for a second, to at least be the owner of the new plant. And it might make sense for the authority to be the owner of all of these other assets, and that asset transfer once we work through the difficult transfer, that actually works. And so what I don't want to say is anything that I'm proposing here ends those discussions. I hope it provides a vehicle for those, or an additional vehicle for those. What it does do is it provides an immediate path to governance and oversight. And as I say immediate, I think this can happen in the first part of 2019. This is just me and a bunch of, believe me words. But what I'm saying is the proposed agreement is a fair path to regional government of water production without transferring assets, changing law, or altering the structure of any current city government entity. Again, those things may have to happen. Maybe we have to go to the legislature at some point. But to get this ball rolling, we wouldn't need to do any of those things. And I would argue that by taking this step, forming this authority, beginning to interact as a regional planning entity, maybe it's going to help identify some of those problems and things that we need to work on before we go to the legislature if we need to, or at least gives us a track record to say, this is what we know works or what we know doesn't work when it comes to regional cooperation. And so it gives us something to start building that track record. As I say, not only that, there's not a lot of cost here. This is there's going to be some cost to Des Moines Water Works because it's going to change a little bit about how we do our business, and takes a little bit of restructuring on that because Bill and his team are going to have to think, next year as they're going through the rate setting process, for example, how do we do this? How do we, what phase do we take this to the board, to the water authority? And we have to contemplate that there could be a denial from the water authority, and that could delay things. And how do we do that? So it's not like there's no cost, but there's minimal cost here. So as I said, I've talked too much, but what I'm proposing is something that I hopefully gives you some of those things you need. And maybe it's not a permanent step, but it would be more than a good faith effort. It would actually be an action on all of our part to say we're serious about this and we want to get started immediately. And we want to start working together as a region. And yes, it doesn't transfer Des Moines Water Works assets tomorrow, but what it does do is it does form a legal agreement that makes Des Moines Water Works and the other entities come to the table and start to work together. And I would hope that you would see it as a way to give you some real authority when it came to these things that are most important to you, setting rates and the way your money is spent. So. Give you heartburn, Mayor of County? That cause you any concern?
I think it goes down, sort of a road, one of the options that we talked about over the last number of years. And I know that there has been some, on the part of some of the customers, the Des Moines Water Works, that they felt through CERDWAC and others that they didn't feel a part of the rate setting. And sounds like at least this is a way to get everybody to the table to begin to work on at least that aspect of it. Obviously, you had some other things in there about transfer of assets and what that looks like moving forward, and I agree with you. I think that that's something that needs to be looked at. There's a number of people around the table that have assets, and but I think all of us at the end of the day want to make sure the points that were brought out by everybody, and even the Mayor Gear, that we've got to be assured of the quantity of water, the quality of our water, and the rates of our water moving forward. And in the moments when we all have some fear of a extreme event, that we have some redundancy that allows the region to continue to have water sources. More than one plant sitting at point A, B, C, D, or E, that we can all work together and hopefully for the next number of generations guarantee the production of water. So,
and that's my
thank you for your thoughts.
That's my goal here with thinking about this, is that putting my own opinions aside about asset transfer, I think it's a bar very high. maybe too high, but that's really not the point. The point is, how do we begin to do some things together quickly while these other things can be? I mean, I might argue that we could set up this authority and it's something that lasts, into the future. But I don't want to overplay that hand. The real purpose of this is to allow us to start governing as a region without these things. I mean, my concern with asset transfer is it adds cost at the end of the day to the ratepayer by, transferring assets, and there's an exchange of money, and there's an exchange of assets. Well, this we can get started with in 2019 without having to worry about any of that, and hopefully giving some real power, so.
Does your regional water authority grant, does it stop a participant from building their own plant?
Yeah, I think it would.
So, I mean, that just doesn't work.
I
Well,
don't know that it wouldn't.
it wouldn't.
It wouldn't stop it, but it would, as I see it, and I think what you're saying is what we're trying to do here is optimize the operation of all regional facilities. So one of the things, I'm not sure it was on your list, you do regional planning, putting in all of your facilities so that you can figure out what is the next facility that we need and how does it fit into all of these facilities. So each community would not be able to go out and say, I'm going to build this for my community. Would be looking at how do we make best use of all the facilities we have, and what is the next facility that we need, and where should it be built, and who wants to build it?
And hopefully give you, and the addition of that, the big piece of that is that it would give you some confidence and hands-on governance when it comes to those things that you're considering when you're building, whether to build a new plant or not. And that is, are these dollars being spent as wisely as possible? Are we investing in the right infrastructure? Are we doing the things that we need to do to assure those things?
I think the challenge, and again, I'll let Jody speak for the water utility, but if West Des Moines can reduce it at $2.50 on its own, and the regional facility sets $3.25 for them, why would they give up the right to produce their own water $2.50? Why would they give up that right? It doesn't make any sense.
Steve, if I may, and we as Des Moines Water Works have left a number of issues that I don't think in our best interests unresponded to, and certainly the 350 versus 275 issue is, in our view, a debatable issue. Ultimately, you as potential owners have to assume whatever engineering analysis you think is most correct. But I want to be clear that moving forward with Waukee in construction of a plant is directly in opposition to Des Moines Water Works interests. If you choose to do that, you certainly have the authority to be able to do that, but it sends a very clear signal to us that you're interested in individual pursuit of interests is to the exclusion of the regional discussions. There's no way that the long-range plan has contemplated that as an optimized facility for the region. That facility, as we understand it, is in direct opposition to a number of interests that we have in the Maffitt facility, and that we're going to challenge it, and already are challenging it in the permit process. So the idea that you can move forward on parallel tracks, building it, and then ultimately saying, well, that's regional, that doesn't work for us, frankly. And I do recognize the timing issue that you face and the economic issue that you face. Those are very real. But this board, for the second time in my career, the first time being the Blackman Beach study, has looked very carefully at monetizing purchase capacity, something that they don't need to do under the terms of the master wholesale agreement. There's no legal reason for them to do that, but are doing it along with opening up the governance process in a way that they think certainly acts in the best interests of Des Moines Water Works and our ratepayers and owners, which are Des Moines residents, but also the region. But I just want to be clear that I think moving forward with the Waukee West Des Moines facility is in direct opposition to our view of our best interest, and the idea that it can somehow later become a regional facility just is not in square with years of planning that have gone in already to our view of what is appropriate regional management. And clearly, they're talking about opening up their governance process, they're talking about monetizing for the second time again, what purchase capacity is worth. Gary, and your point about the benefits and costs and where the line is and how much Ankeny or Urbandale or Grimes or whomever can benefit and how much is a disincentive to West Des Moines, those numbers are arguable. They were arguable before here, they're just as arguable there. Ultimately, it's part of the negotiations process, and there will have to be considerations on how rates or expenses, however we want to term it, are viewed to keep as many people engaged in this process as possible. But the idea that there can be additional plants that aren't part of the current arsenal, I think, particularly immediately upstream from the Maverick facility will be a problem for us.
Would that same apply to Urbandale's?
Yes.
Facility?
But Urbandale, frankly, 2 years ago or whatever, hit a moratorium on even anything concerning their production as far as we're concerned. It's West Des Moines that's moved forward with it, Steve, in a very specific way. That's of far greater concern to us than the prospective plans that Urbandale has had out there for some period of time and backed away from.
Let me ask you too, on the Regional Water Authority, is it West Des Moines, Grimes, Polk City, Xenia, and Altoona that have production facilities?
Xenia and Gary can certainly comment on this, not immediately that which would add to the larger facility here. Grimes, yes, Polk City, Altoona, West Des Moines, I believe that's the are.
So I'm trying to understand when Graham said that the people that have production facilities would have a
Not
seat at the table.
right. Not necessarily, and this is up for debate. I don't necessarily see it as entities that have production, but entities that act as retail providers of water. So a Clive, for example, could potentially, if this is what people wanted to pursue, could potentially be a party to this agreement.
Would the, and it gets back to control, would Des Moines always have 51% of the votes?
I don't know. I haven't thought that far along about how that would work.
But you have to. I mean, it's the
Well-
elephant in the room.
But if,
Okay, we all have a seat at the table, we've given up all these rights, but yet we don't have a majority, we can't control the outcome of the vote. I mean, that was the whole conversation we're getting into with DART and everything else.
I mean-
WRA, I mean, we all struggle with, okay, how can we
Initially-
make sure that the voting is fair?
Initially, in this concept, because Des Moines Waterworks is the regional provider of water, I mean, Des Moines Waterworks would be the entity, the only entity that comes before the Water Authority to approve rates. West Des Moines wouldn't because it doesn't sell its water outside of its own jurisdiction. So one might argue, and I'm just talking out loud, that the initial Water Authority, because Des Moines Waterworks is the vendor, if you will, is the contract holder, maybe it's established in a different manner. Maybe those votes, because those votes are contemplating, wholesale rates and certain things. And as I say, I'm just talking out loud. Maybe there's a way to give you some comfort there that gives you, the type of voting structure you need, because Des Moines Waterworks is the one that's coming and presenting. I mean, under that model, it's more like a utilities board. I mean, it's a slightly different concept, but it could act as an entity that actually approves the things that are brought to it. So maybe that's, as we think through it, maybe that's a way to address that for you.
Steve, from a governance standpoint, I think it would be inconceivable for Des Moines not to recognize that the future growth and future demands are going to be outside the city of Des Moines. And so at some point, there would be a movement of governance with a majority of the governance authority being held outside the city of Des Moines. I mean, I think that's inevitable. When that happens and how that happens, I think really is more of a policymaker's issue than it is a staff issue. But certainly we recognize the demographics of this area. The demographics of this area are that Des Moines will be the smaller of the entities, particularly when looking at the suburbs collectively.
Okay. I'll give one more thought, because I need to leave in 5 minutes, and I've talked enough, and I'll let everybody else. But you have to help us get to the point, and I think it includes Urbandale, other people that come in. You have to help us figure out how can we make sure we're going to get the water we need and the quantities we need at the price that we think is fair, to sit back and say, okay, we're not going to move forward with any other alternative. You have to help us get there like now, because otherwise we've run out of time for an alternative.
On that you and I agree. I mean, that is exactly where I want us to get. And as I say, what I proposed here today is not, no means by saying this is the end all, this is our offer and we're gonna walk from the table. I think it's an interim step. I think it's a way for us to create this authority, start to interact, find out problems and successes that we can fix as we explore, asset transfer and future ownership policy, ideas or lease things, all of those things. But it gives us something, hopefully, that we can do quickly to begin to give you some of that control and governance that you're seeking. Because I think it's important. I mean, I think it's very important for the right reason that's kind of counter to what you said, Mayor, and that is, this is more about whether you're gonna pay $250 or you're gonna pay $275. There's more here than a short-term dollar amount for what you're gonna pay. It's the long-term handling of a finite resource, a fragile resource that could be polluted, could be, we could run out of water in the aquifer. There's a lot of things. So it's more than just figuring out as best we can determine what the cost is gonna be. Is it cheaper for one city to build a plant, or is it just better for the region long-term to have control and planning for the future?
Mayor Guerin, I know you need to leave. I just want to offer one other observation. I think the discussion from here forward needs to be professionally facilitated by someone, whether it's FCS or whomever it is. That's ultimately a decision, I think, for you as policymakers, but try to problem solve without facilitation in a group this size, I think is going to do nothing more than burn time. And time for all of us, I think, is critical. It's just as critical for Des Moines Waterworks as it is for West Des Moines and everyone else at the table. So how you get there and still provide the protection that you're concerned about, we have similar interests in timing also.
I mean, if you guys had ideas on how to solve that, we'd love to hear directly from you versus getting Jason involved. But I think we get a sense of kind of what at least some of us are concerned about. And it's not like we don't want to do this, but we can't get to the point where we've run out or we tell our ratepayers you're paying 50% more than you really should. And I don't think anybody would be looking at an alternative if they were comfortable that they were going to get what they needed, when they needed it, at a fair price. No one would have gone about this other alternative of, should I really not doing this myself?
Purely my observation, but what you need, when you need it, at a fair price is a governance issue. I mean, if you have a seat at the table and are fairly represented in that planning process, then that's how you reach that objective. And again, I think this board has indicated their willingness to look at governance issues. How that actually is operationalized, I think, is going to take someone with some ability to be able to help us to understand those numbers in the reasonable range that can get us to future planning and future governance. Whether you're the minority now and the majority later as suburban customers, I think is completely foreseeable to everybody on this side of the table.
Yeah, and I've always said, like the WRA, it either works for all of us or it doesn't. It's the same thing with DART. I said, okay, on the weighted voting, if we get to weighted voting, we got a lot bigger problems than our bus system. So this either works for all of us or it doesn't, and we've figured that out in other regional collaboration things. We should be able to do it here, but I'm fearful after a year that we're not farther along to convince at least some of us that, okay, we're gonna get what we need when we need it at a fair price yet.
Well, from my perspective, I kind of feel like I've been chasing a rabbit for a few years because we've changed things. We originated this with, we are not gonna talk about selling assets or transferring assets or any of that. And then we quickly transitioned, and then we've been talking about it. And we've been going to these meetings, and I've been coming, and I as I do everything in my life, I go there with the intent to do what I say I'm going to do. And then recently I've been asked, and then asked again to reiterate that, no, really, I'm serious about this process. And meanwhile, I'm kind of wondering about West Des Moines, because pursuing other plants and things in the meantime, it makes me wonder, from my perspective, on the effort I put into this, is there going to be a satisfactory answer at some point? So that's what I want to know. And I think it's optimistic to think that you're going to get water at the rates that have been put out there. But further, just considering if you just look at one data point, like if you optimistically did have that, there's still the other benefits, and we do need to work regionally in a lot of ways. And that was the impetus to get here is we do have a lot of things to work on, even beyond, way beyond just that one issue of how much that additional gallon of water is gonna cost, or what you can produce it for. So, I'd ask you to consider that in your own understanding of what you wanna do here. And my thought, after going through and hearing what Jason and his team had to say, was that the next thing we were gonna do is that we're all serious about this. We're gonna talk about what those trade-offs are. There are savings for some, and there are costs for others in different areas. And we're gonna start bargaining on those and figuring out where everybody is so that we can make that happen. I think all of us on our board are there, and we want that to happen. But we've twice now reiterated that that's where we are. So it's a matter of getting that done and making it happen. When we started this country, people talked about a confederacy because they didn't want to give up so much. We want to retain it. The whole idea of having regional governance is that we're all in this together. We really are. And so to some degree, there are going to be people pushing for ownership, but we really all need to get to a place where we're talking about how do we make this happen together, and give up some of the territorial aspects of this that are setting us off. It really does benefit all of us. Frankly, looking at those numbers, I'm not sure what boards did before us or why. I think what it shows, Des Moines has been, as Jason said, shouldering a larger burden, keeping that capacity, so other people, when you need it, the water's there. And there's been governance trade-offs and other things. We own the water, we've been selling the water, we've been making those agreements, and if we want to change that, we got to change our thinking too.
So Graham, but what you're suggesting though, the way I envision it, is it's almost like Des Moines Water Works would end up having a board and a sub-board, or however you want to do it, because you'd be part of the authority. And you keep the assets right there to start with, and you've got to have this much to cover your costs, so then everybody's got to vote around here, including you, for production, and we're going to agree to buy water at this rate. And then that regional authority's going to take care of that. You're still the supplier, but we're going to give a better voice in how you figure out your costs and what part of it's for production and what part, because you're still going to have distribution separate.
Right.
And you have to.
And what Mayor Guerra brings up about representation is a fair one, right? I mean, Des Moines Water Works is gonna, as you say, gonna be that supplier of water. And so, yes, our board is going to exist, and, Des Moines Water Works is gonna bring those items to this authority for approval. When I was thinking about this, I thought, by forming this authority, you form something that may function well into the future. That would be the entity that received assets, if that was the case, or what have you. And so in thinking that way, yes, Des Moines would be represented in that authority. But if, and I'm not saying this is a good idea or not, but if we're thinking out loud, if this authority is acting more like a utilities board, is acting like a separate entity that Des Moines Water Works has the contract to, maybe you set it up in a way that Des Moines doesn't have that equal influence on the authority because it's the one bringing it to the board, if I'm making any sense. And I don't know, that's something we'd have to put our heads together about, because I think the ultimate goal is to have a regional authority where everyone's represented in a fair way. But that's a fair thing that we have to discuss, because if it's just a show that we create this thing and Des Moines Water Works controls the authority, well, we're not going to fool anybody. That's not what we're trying to do.
Right.
Graham, how do you pull purchase capacity into this? I guess I'm still not clear on that.
I don't know the answer to that question, and I think an ultimate goal of this authority would be the entity to rethink and maybe how to rewrite purchase capacity. Whether we're going to do away with the existing agreements and replace them with something else.
If you have a Johnston that doesn't have any purchase capacity,
Correct.
and then you have an Urbandale that does.
Correct.
They each have a seat at the table, but
Would they have different rates?
I don't know. And see, and this brings up an interesting point too, because as I was thinking about this, so how do you start this? You know, is this an agreement that Urbandale, Ankeny, Des Moines, West Des Moines start, and they start this together, and then you let others come in? Is this something that you basically take Serdwek and make all? I don't know the answers to those questions.
That's key though to this.
It is very key, but the idea is, my purpose today is hopefully to seed the ground a little bit and say, let's form this authority that gives this, and I think there's other details we can work out. As I say, I keep coming back to what Mayor Gare said. If this is an entity that is more of a utilities board, well, maybe that simplifies the initial launch of this, because we know how this looks and we know how to make this a representative body among those players. I don't know.
I mean, I applaud you on your efforts, and I like the broad brushstrokes, but I think we've also been spending the last 2 years, we started the last time with the broad brushstrokes, saying, yeah, we can do this, and then we get into the weeds again, and some of the weed questions that we're talking about today, that's where we got bogged down. When you say we can get this done very simply and get it done in early 2019, that's when I start to think, well, how do we do that, and how do we answer some of these very critical questions to get that done? So I respect it, I like the concept of it, but I think we're gonna get to the same point that we're gonna get bogged down into a lot of the details, and how do we cross?
Maybe, I think a lot of the details that we've been bogged down in the last 18 months have been financial. They've been how to figure out how to evaluate the asset transfer model, and that we continue to go down that road. What I'm trying to propose here is something that does away with that complicated thing and says that the signers of this agreement, whether it be Ankeny and Urbandale and a few other entities, that they agree to form this authority. And Des Moines Waterworks agrees to, as part of this agreement, agrees to bring these items of regional production to that authority. And those are spelled out from day one of what the authority is going to have the ability to approve and not approve. That way we can begin to do these things before we address purchase capacity, which is something that has to be addressed. But I think you could contemplate in the agreement that discussions on purchase capacity, as those things end their completion date, would be discussed and handled by the authority or approved by the authority.
Perhaps, Graham, people who wanted to vote could buy purchase capacity.
Possibly, yes.
There might be a lot of variations.
That's an interesting way to say it.
I think when we jumped to asset purchases was a result of the 28E and 28F, which brought up the legality of who has ultimate authority to bond, and what does the bonding council say, because who owns what, and who has the ultimate authority to charge the rates. And what you're proposing, I'm hearing, because we would be taking regional dollars, investing them perhaps in Des Moines Waterworks structures that could create a legality issue of who really has the ultimate authority to bond for that, right? And we're bonding for something that's gonna be given to Des Moines Waterworks. I think that's how we came down this path, because it's not as simple as just simply put together a committee and say you have the regional authority to set rates. The other portion of that I would have a little concern with is that under this regional structure, I don't disagree with it. Certainly would be simple not to do asset transfer. It's very complicated. It's not an easy thing, and it certainly is a reason there's a roadblock here. But I don't know how you get through some of those legal issues as well as the fact that you still have the issue in which Des Moines Waterworks, for instance, in our current cost of service meeting that we had, present rates. We used to present a very complicated executive summary that was this thick, but at least you could go through it. This time we got one page, and there's no in the details as to how to get to those numbers. And so how do you get past that communication that says, Des Moines Waterworks is simply saying, this is the rate, this is what it is. How can we as a committee say, no, that's not the rate? There would have to be a much more open presentation of the bills, of what those costs are than what we're seeing today.
Agreed. I mean, I think that authority would get every bit of information that our finance and audit committee gets and our full board gets when we look at how rates are set. And the authority would have the ability to ask for it to be presented in a different way or for more information. I mean, that's the ultimate goal here, is to make sure that those at the table are getting that information that you want. We're not just serving, Des Moines Waterworks isn't just providing you a document. We're actually, there's a formal process here and a governance process. I mean, the goal here is to get you what you want and to make you not only feel, but actually be a participant in the process.
This has started a year ago with the legislature. And at that time, and call me a simpleton if you want, at that time, let's just make the board bigger. And there was a group of write-up of people saying everybody had a different reason why you can't do that. Fine. So we started down this road, and we spent a lot of money and a tremendous amount of time going through this stuff here. And I appreciate the time and thought and energy you put into this. But, just from quickly reading through those slides, I mean, to me, this is kind of I wouldn't say it's a 180-degree turn.
I don't want to do that.
But it's a big turn from where I thought we were at as a group. I mean, our whole study with Jason was going under the premise of there's be some sort of an ownership in everything. And again, I don't take this the wrong way, but to look at this, it looks like, you set up the authority and then you start, maybe piecemealing some stuff into the authority. And then over time, you jump off into the dock. But to me, it just feels like there's an out in it someplace.
I don't want you to feel that way. And I definitely don't want you to feel like it's a turn. In anything, I would hope this was a step in the same direction.
And to me, I'm not grasping the difference between doing what you proposed and saying, okay, everybody here at the table raise their hand, it's all in, and this is why we're all in. Okay, now that we're in this thing, everybody is committed to dealing with the things that would eventually come in under your model. I mean, you're in it, you got skin in it, and you can't get out, you don't want to get out, because this is the solution that everybody's been working towards. And like I say, this is like, just at a first blush, it just looks like this, we took a different exit, with this one.
No, I don't, and that, if I present it that way, then I've failed. This, in my opinion, would be a step to start getting you, particularly, pick on you, pick on Ankeny, getting Ankeny what they want, as a portion of what they want sooner, so that we don't have to figure out asset transfer before you start having a meaningful say and participation in setting rates. And it doesn't stop at that pursuit of asset transfer, if that's the direction that this thing needs to go. It just provides you, hopefully, more than just reassurance that Des Moines Waterworks is interested and wants to do this. It actually provides something meaningful when it comes to governance.
Because somebody tell me if I'm wrong on this, but it seems to me that we talked at some point in this past year about something similar to this, where we were creating another level, which is the authority, and then things would be fed to that authority, but it's basically just creating another step. So that's why we kind of directed back to everybody's in it with all the skin. And then, Des Moines Waterworks, I don't know what you would call it, but I mean, Des Moines Water Works is an operating agency that provides water. And the same thing could be kind of said for West Des Moines, even though their water doesn't feed out through the entire system. I mean, maybe that down the road, sometime if it's, I don't even know if it's feasible or not, but you put another pipe coming out of West Des Moines, and some of that water's going to somebody out west. I mean, it'd be no different than water coming out of here going to different places. But, you know, like I say, just at my first blush here, it just seems like this is a little bit of a turn off the course that we were on. That's my opinion. I don't know if anybody's agrees or disagrees with that. It's quiet.
Everybody's quiet. I love to talk, I guess, but that, I want to speak for Altoona anyway, and West Des Moines, I think, is in the same boat. When we started talking about it, and then we went to moving the assets, the problem that we had with moving the assets over is, it's like, okay, we've got our assets, we paid for it, we've got water, we've got extra capacity, and so we turn the assets over right away, and then based on Jason's financial numbers, for instance, Altoona's position, I could go from spending less than $2 for producing water, and it was gonna take we were gonna go to $4 a thousand. That means that extra $2 a thousand, I'm gonna have to take back to our citizens and say, guess what, I'm gonna have to tack that on top of the rates, because that's the only way we get the difference.
But as Bill brought up, just assume for now that that graph is right. That's where we started talking about, okay, we play a little Robin Hood here.
And that's when I talked with, not Jason, Andy and them, and that's one of the things I said, you made different assumptions, the wrong assumption for this and that, even though we gave you numbers. He says, well, this is where you want to negotiate with Des Moines Water Works and everybody else to make those rates more equitable. So that's what I assumed was gonna probably end up having to happen if we're gonna do it. There'd have to be that negotiation to make things a little more equitable. Otherwise, the way it looks, we're giving up everything and we're gonna pay more. And I'm just a small water user I'm not West Des Moines or
Let
anybody
me
else.
ask a waterworks question here. Just assume that nobody else had plans on the table to build another facility someplace. And we're, as Steve pointed out, we've shaved that 3 to 5 year window theoretically to 2 to 4 year window. In your CIP, you've got plans to fully utilize the capacity of this plant, I presume, and probably beyond that. How does your CIP fit with that 2 to 4 year window?
A little complicated because
I mean, we've already burned through a year.
when we're concerned about losing major customers.
Yeah, but just
West,
assuming that that's,
changes our
assuming
CIP.
that that's not an issue.
But to give you an example, Gary, I think the heart of your question is, are you making decisions now that are looking at demand requirements in the future? The board, in the half hour before this meeting started, took action involving an investment at Saylorville. They're adding an additional, essentially 2 MGD at Saylorville. So that's the kind of decisions that they're going to continue to make. If all hands were on deck and we knew what was going on, that decision might be a little bit different. That is, we might be doing something at Maffitt as an example, but the kind of oversimplified reality from my vantage that some folks here will cringe on, right now it's easier to add capacity to existing plants than it is to build new plants. That's obviously a whole new investment in infrastructure, electrical, and transportation related. We are at a process of adding incrementally to the 3 existing facilities that are under our direct control and continue to be concerned about this timing issue. We're certainly hoping that Urbandale and Ankeny are in this as we move forward, because realistically we're looking at investment decisions that are involving plants to our north rather than plants to our west right now as part of our CIP. I don't know if that's responsive to your question, but hopefully you're getting that we're not looking at building new plants. We have 3 existing plants, each of which can have some addition made to them, and we're making reasonable decisions about that with a concern that we might lose part of our market.
I mean, in my mind, there's two concerns, is how much are you gonna pay for the gallon of water that you get? And two, do you even have the option to get that gallon of water? Is it even possible to deliver that?
At that level of abstraction, it's pretty easy for me to answer yes, I think, to all of them. Clearly,
Well, I mean,
we
if
know
we-
that
if
we
we
can bring
said-
more out of Saylorville
If we
through.
spend for another couple of years, and the Moines Water Works is reluctant to keep pace, if that's the right word, with regional growth, then in my mind, we're running into that delivery.
No question, you're absolutely correct, and Steve was correct also. We have to know what the future demand is if we're gonna make that investment. And if we think that there's a question about whether the demand will be to the west, as an example, we're not gonna be adding additional capacity, either in production or transmission to the west. We'll be adding it where it's solid in our view, and that's to the north, or right here.
Stan mentioned that, the numbers that they came up with, when I said we'd be, according to them, we'd be paying an instant $2 more per thousand right out of the gate. We're already buying water from you for way less than that, and it's hard to figure that out, but the only way I came to that was, it's because that was that transfer of assets and what money would have to go to pay everybody for their assets. That's what's gonna raise that cost of that regional authority. Because otherwise, we're all buying the water from you for less than that now.
There's also a very big problem with the comparability of data. The existing waterworks costs are known. The existing investment in the water plant is known. When you're talking about the hypothetical West Des Moines plant, those costs are not known, they're estimated. And based upon our experience with costs and capital investment projections that our experts have built into the capital investment plan, the West Des Moines numbers are just grossly understated and thus create a mismatch and a non-data comparability problem, which in turn becomes a very, very, very difficult obstacle to the asset transfer model and the accomplishment of that, particularly when people are beginning to get worried about getting this done in the next 12 months.
You know,
I'd like to point out that in addition to all that, there's never yet been a mechanism suggested that I've heard for dealing with the existing bonds that have to be paid or the fees if there's going to be an asset transfer. There's just no plan on the table for solving these mismatch problems and the bonding problems. And I think that might be an argument for interim measures that don't go whole hog and they're so hard to do that you can't get them accomplished.
You know, and I think too, when you look at the numbers that they came up with, anytime you do that kind of study, it's a snapshot of time. And everybody argues over today. I mean, the question is, do we think that optimizing these facilities, doing planning on a larger regional basis is a good idea with this asset? If we do, then maybe we can look at these things, and we all understand we have to take care of these issues today. If your rates are gonna go from $2 to $4, you're not gonna be able to go back to your constituents and explain that to them, and who wants to put you in that position? So we figure out what to do in the short term, but do we believe in the long-term vision of what we're trying to do? And if we do, how do we start to go about that? I mean, if the first thing is we have to transfer assets, I think it has more off-ramps than doing this kind of interim step and getting going on some of these things, and more opportunities for stopping and saying, well, we just can't get it done. Especially if we're looking at this short term, we have to make decisions about how we go about doing this. So I think, you know, maybe we set up an authority and we do planning in that authority, and we look at more of a certificate of need, what we need on a regional basis, and who wants to provide that. Maybe that's provided by a community rather than by the authority. and we figure out how to take that into consideration in setting the rates. But, so maybe we do that, maybe we set those rates on a basis. Maybe we don't do a representational board of, you know, we get 6 and you get 1 and you get 2. Maybe we do just figure out how to set up, like you said, a utilities board kind of thing, where nobody can figure out, oh, I have those 6 votes locked down. I was on the utilities board for a number of years, and nobody ever said, gosh, Des Moines, which has the bulk of the population, should have 6 votes on this board, because you're setting rates for them as opposed to, you know, a county out there. When you set these rates, they're based on cost. There are a lot of ways that you can look at it, different assumptions that you make, different cost-setting principles, but you try to do it in a transparent way and figure out, how do we do this in a way that's fair to most of the people here? Not try to set it up so that I could vote, so that it would be more fair to me than somebody else. And that's the whole thing about a regional entity. It's like, we're all in this together, this is our asset, and we don't want it, we can't make you look bad, or you look bad, because that's gonna defeat the whole purpose.
When we started this, Jason had some comments a year and a half ago. He said, if you regionalize, then everybody's gonna benefit. We all have to come out ahead.
Yeah.
And I think everybody on the table thought, agreed, we can get there. And he showed this great graph that showed everybody's costs are better off. And I think we all agreed to that. But when we finished the report, it was like Vern said, we had double your rates if you regionalize. And so to me, that doesn't make sense. And maybe I'm all wrong with this, but it seems like the main driver of that cost difference is the asset. It's the transfer of money to pay for that asset. So to me, it's not going to be $4.13 for Waukee tomorrow, and it's not going to be $1.98 like it is today. And somehow you got to get from here to there. And I don't believe that if you wait another year or 2 years and do this process, that asset conversation is going to get any easier. And it just seems to me that we just have to buck up and say, what's that number going to be? Because that's what's going to sell it to people in our communities, is that if you regionalize, you're getting a fair deal. And so I don't think it's going to be $4.13, and it's not going to be $1.98, but it's going to be somewhere that we got to sit around the table and hammer this thing out.
So what would you like to see as a next step?
I think there are people smarter than me that will be around the table and say, let's figure what that sweet spot is. Because just that you said to Vern, is that we can't go back and say you're going to double your rates. And you can't go back to your folks and say, well, we just gave away all your assets. Because that's not fair to you. Well, somewhere there's a sweet spot that makes sense for everybody. And if we don't do that, we won't have an optimized system, and we'll all lose that way. So at some point, you got to get off the dime and reduce the value of that asset. And we got to say there's an increased cost for us somewhere in here to make sure that you are happy with it, and so are we. And I'm convinced that there is that spot, but it can't be threats and pushes and all that. It's got to be, how do we meet each other's needs in this?
So are you thinking that we have to do asset transfer into a regional
It's the
authority as
big
a first
elephant in
step?
the room. It's got to be handled today or 5 years from now or 10 years. Somehow you got to get there. And I know it's complicated. Jim and Jason went through all that. It was complicated. We got Altoona and West Des Moines piece, and I think that's got to be worked through. But until you tackle that, I don't think this goes anywhere. That's just me. So I don't want to skew it.
So you asked what the next steps are. I think you need to demonstrate that this is gonna work and that we need to go this path.
What does that mean, Mayor?
Well, I think we're at the point where we're talking in broad brush strokes of regionalism, saying that we're all better in this together. But we're talking about what the pitfalls might be and where we fall down. So, you know, if we're gonna take that next step, how do we, can we put some meat on the bones of what Graham has put together? And let's talk about some of these issues as far as rate differences and governance and how we, I guess I need to be convinced that this structure is better off than what we've been talking about before or going off on our own.
To me, it comes, and this is Pollyanna, but it's the whole concept of interest-based bargaining. And negotiating and beating each other over with the stick is never gonna work, because we're gonna look at each other for the next 50 years. So at some point.
you might.
Well,
You write the exercise, that's what you gotta do.
120, I don't think that'll
But
work.
but at some point, each side has to say, how do we meet the other person's interests, not the position. I think we're all in positions right now. That's what-
Well, and part of it is deciding who's at that table. I mean, for the proposal that I bring today, or that I roughed out today, you know, who are the signers of that agreement, I think is a first question that needs to be contemplated. You know, I propose that they be cities that offer, you know, that have their own retail water operation. I don't know if that's the right mechanism or not. I mean, maybe it's those who produce water or have the capacity to produce water, but that would then leave out an ankeny. So I think the first thing we need to decide is who are we targeting this agreement, at least initially, who would be the parties to that, and then do exactly what the mayor proposed, and then flesh it out a little bit about how it would work, not just what it would do, but how it would work. And that goes to representation and those sort of things. And then obviously you have to contemplate, depending on who are the initial signers, you have to contemplate who could sign later. I mean, who would be, you know, how would this grow as an entity? So those things kind of need to, there's a give and take there that needs to be decided. I mean, I don't know how best to do that, but.
In the conversations I've had with Jason about what is our next step, he said, I've been giving that a lot of thought. And whether it's a Jason from FCS or another entity, I'm gonna go back to what Bill said. We need someone to help us figure out how we get to that sweet spot and who the interested parties are that want to be part of that and start doing the planning and setting the rates and move ahead. So is that something that this group would like to do as a next step, is to have someone help us facilitate? We know who the winners are, we know who the losers are. How do we ship that sand to get to the right point? And what is the timeline of setting this up and moving quickly, as Graham was saying, to having the people at the table committed to a regional entity?
And if I may, maybe it's too directed, but Bob, I'm trying to be responsive to your concern and question. In an ideal world, sitting where I'm sitting, having 3 or 4 communities involved at this point with a professionally facilitated discussion is critical. If a signed agreement comes out of that, that's fine, but I think with 10 or 12 or 14 communities involved at this point, it will go nowhere quickly. This isn't an all-volunteer issue. At this point, I think there's a prototype that needs to be developed, some discussion of where the sweet spot is and how to get there, but a relatively small group of communities, like, at least in my view, West Des Moines, Urbandale, Ankeny, and Des Moines Waterworks. And if those 4 communities are able to agree on how this can be facilitated going forward, whether it's asset transfer or whether it's an interim measure like this, I think, or both are going to be pretty critical. But realistically, try to problem solve with a group this big will get us closer to urgency deadlines and frustration from West Des Moines or Urbandale as to wanting to build or expand existing facilities and having their back up against the wall.
I agree fully. I would make a suggestion on that, it kind of takes on what these guys said, that if you guys would take Graham's work here, and as Bob said, put a little more meat on the bone on it, and ask questions of us at whatever the appropriate time for that is. What's wrong with what we'd like to see, and beef it up a little bit more, and then put together, just get the executive committee back together. But But I think it's fine that if we have another facilitator, whoever that is. But I think what we need to do is be able to take, if it's this or something like this or something totally different, this is what we want to do. How can you help us get there? And that goes to finding the sweet spot of where those lines cross. But I agree that if we keep having these really big meetings, that we've been doing that for a year. And like I said, it's not a derogatory comment. I don't think this is what we finished our last meeting with Jason about. But if we take that as I hate to say a starting point again, but take that and deal with that piece there correctly to see if it can get us to where we're going. And then once the executive committee messes with it, get it out to everybody else, the electeds, the mayors, the managers, and have them look at it. And then get feedback from them back to the executive committee, and however many trips you have to make back and forth on that. I mean, to me, that'd be the way that you negotiate something out. So we have to keep everybody involved at some level, or we're running to the same place. The executive committee came up with this, and I don't like that. And so you're in the same spot. If you've got a communication back and forth with the system, I mean, that should deal with it.
Yeah, I like what you suggested there. I mean, I think that's right. I mean, as we discussed today, the concept that I brought forward, immediately splits into this kind of utilities board type concept or an actual water authority type concept. Both of those you need to kind of see, right? I mean, you need to kind of have something fleshed out. And that utilities board concept is an interesting one that might lend itself well in some ways to this. But we have
an appointment issue, like who says?
Who says and how does that work? And I mean,
But I mean, I think we possibly could put some different things together that would show people.
I hear you.
So I hear what you're saying. I think as a board, we're going to need some help in doing that, which we can discuss as a board, how we facilitate that. And getting meat on the bones to a regional water utility with plans for maybe possible outcomes where that could go. I mean, Graham keeps saying at some point it could be asset transfer. When Jason was here, he talked about it could be a started now toward a lease type of agreement so that everyone doesn't come in day one. So you show the purchase capacity contracts and the value of that, but so it doesn't penalize in Johnston. So I think maybe if we could get some additional support and help to put some meat on this bones and come back to you relatively quickly, that would be. Does everyone on the board agree that might be a good next step?
Yeah, I mean,
If that would satisfy what you're asking.
I think if you walk out of this meeting and you hear anything today, what I hope you hear is that Des Moines, one crazy guy, me, brings this idea, and you didn't see my fellow board members walk out of the room. I mean, what we're interested in finding a way to regional governance. I mean, I think all of us are a little bit baffled about what that road looks like, but not once, it's frustrating as it's been for everybody that has participated in this in the last couple of years. Not once has Des Moines Water Works threatened to take our marbles and go home and just continue to do what we're doing. We realize that is not in our best interest. I mean, we're here because it's in our best interest to figure out how to form some sort of regional governance. So if you walk out of here tonight, that's what I want you to hear is that we're not concerned about our particular water rate, or we're not about protecting what we have. We just want to figure out how to do it, and we want to. And that's what I want you to walk away with, is that we're interested in figuring this out. Maybe we're not smart enough to do it yet, but we're trying.
Get help to.
Graham, I appreciate all those points, and I believe, I know we've all been here, I think it's, you said a year, I think it's actually been 2 years.
It's been 2 years.
You missed a year. We're all still around the table, I mean, it's, so, we just need to, we know what the concepts are, we know what we need to try to get to, we just need to answer some more of those questions, so.
And I try to, as best I can, understand what it's like to be in the Mayor of Riverdale's shoes, the Mayor Ankeny's shoes, or, you know, I try very hard. I know what you guys need to do, and it's not spending a whole bunch of time talking about water. You wanna have water taken care of so that you can go run your city and you know it's gonna be safe and water's gonna be available. And that's what we gotta get. You need to stop talking about water. I know that it's done.
By the same token, what I've said over and over again, we need to get this right as a region.
Absolutely.
For the next 50 to 100 years.
Absolutely.
So if we don't get this right, we're failing not only us now, but also future generations.
Absolutely. We're all in agreement on that.
So everyone feels good, we know what we're gonna do. We owe you follow-up on an expanded with maybe some various options as to where this could go in the future. And bringing it back to the executive committee of the 4 groups, the 4 mayors and the 3 water utility representatives. That's what I'm hearing.
I think you also have to at least have a framework. We're talking about the asset issue. That drives all these conversations when it goes back to the community, when they say, well, what's our rate gonna be, not specifically, but what's the structure look like for the next X years? We have to have that figured out. And to me, it's just gonna take some commitment on both sides to figure out what the best spot is.
Well, it's definitely the asset transfer that raises the rates. That's the way it is.
Let's all keep talking. I know that Jody and John and I have a couple of meetings coming up in the next few weeks. And
Well, you guys figure it out by the time.
Yeah, right.
there you go, Jody.
So now what about
Hey, Jody, are you going out of town?
Not until January.
Okay.
I'm gonna be in town longer than John.
You're
Yeah.
trying to get this figured out before you go out of town.
Don't ask John.
Yeah.
I appreciate the discussion and the time, especially the comments I've heard from the Moines trustees, Waterworks trustees. You understand the sweet spot issues, because I think that's important from Graham's presentation, that exit ramp is maybe different, and I think I've shared with Sue and John a different exit ramp myself. Dozens of complicating factors, none of which are, in my opinion, insurmountable. I've been through this before in the WRA process. We can get there, but like any other entity around the table, West Des Moines Waterworks and the city of West Des Moines needs to make sure that there's enough water for our needs when it's going to be needed. And we recognize that Urbandale has been down this road before a couple years ago with, if they had built a plant maybe 2 or 3 years ago or got it under contract, they may be in a position of having a cheaper rates now than under the asset transfer method. I know that the West Des Moines trustees are cognizant of that and are trying to position ourselves so we're not in that same potential predicament. So we're willing to listen. On the other hand, we want to make sure that we have the water available for our ratepayers, as well as a potential partnership with Waukee and Van Meter, who also share the desire to make sure that they have water out on the west side. Just like you're talking about expanding Saylorville for needs up in the Johnston, Ankeny, and North Urbandale area.